So it does seem like there's so much more material in medical school, just because the amount of content they're giving you in a week is a lot more than in pharmacy school. I would say, I think because of that, like I thought I had a relatively decent understanding in terms of like how I study in pharmacy school, but that approach I realized just does not work in medical school. And so it really is something that, when they say you're drinking out of a fire hose, I understand it now.
Welcome to the Physician Pharmacist podcast, a show designed to shed some light on a very unusual pathway into medicine. I'm your host, Nathan Gartland. I'm a licensed pharmacist and fourth-year medical student. I'm also the author of PharmD to MD and the owner of the Physician Pharmacist company. As this podcast has grown, we have had tremendous opportunity to broaden our scope and explore other non-traditional pharmacy careers. The PharmD opens so many doors, and by listening in, you have the opportunity to learn from experts in the field on how to start your own journey. Before we start today's interview, I'd like to announce that we are actively searching for new guests to interview on the podcast. If you think you have a unique story or know someone interesting or have a unique life experience related to medicine, pharmacy, or business, please reach out for the potential to be a guest on the show. In today's episode, I have the pleasure of speaking with Dr. Prachi Parikh. Dr. Parikh is a licensed pharmacist and current first-year medical student at the Rutgers Robert Wood Johnson Medical School. Dr. Parikh graduated from the Ernest Mario School of Pharmacy at Rutgers in 2023 and is a participant in the first and only PharmD to MD dual degree program in the country. Alrighty, welcome to the show, Dr. Parikh.
Hi, how are you?
Super excited to have you on today. I think we have a lot of great things to talk about, and I'm just super excited. We've never had anyone from this particular dual degree pathway before, so I think we've got a lot to explore.
Yeah, I'm glad to talk about it. It'll be fun.
All right, so let's start way back at the beginning. Where are you from, and why did you pursue a degree in pharmacy in the first place?
So I am born and raised in Edison, New Jersey, which is actually really close to Rutgers University. I would say my path into pharmacy was kind of a unique one in that I never really considered pharmacy school at all, actually, when I was like growing up. I come from a background that doesn't have any like healthcare workers in my family. So when I said I was interested in working in healthcare, the two fields that we kind of really thought about was, going to medical school or nursing, just because that's all we really knew back then. And so in my senior year, I was applying to Rutgers, and Rutgers gives you the opportunity to apply to 3 schools within Rutgers, so like arts and sciences and School of Engineering. And so at that point, I was planning on applying, going the pre-med route, going a general science major. And so I just put in as like a placeholder, I put Ernest Mario School of Pharmacy. And I ended up being really lucky in getting accepted. And at that point, I didn't really know anything about the program or about pharmacy in general. I kind of had the biased opinion that pharmacy was just community pharmacy. And so I really wasn't sure if that's something that I wanted to do, but I had cousins who were at Rutgers and they all had friends in the pharmacy school. And so I kind of spoke with them about it. I really looked into, the different paths and careers that pharmacists could take. And so I came across clinical pharmacy as one of the paths, like doing a residency and going that way. And for me personally, I think it really checked some of the boxes at that time in terms of what I wanted. I wanted to work in a hospital. I wanted to be in healthcare and interact with patients. So clinical pharmacy kind of felt like that best fit. And because it was a 6-year PharmD program, I just felt like I might as well give it a shot. I was really glad that I really liked it. I actually had a really good time, and I stuck with it after the first 2 pre-professional years, and here I am.
Wow, that's amazing. So
Yeah.
You had an initial interest, obviously, in medical school, and it's kind of ironic that you did this full circle pathway to get there. But so pharmacy kind of drew you in a little bit with the clinical side of things, but deep down, it was really that like hands-on medical stuff that kind of came back to the surface, and that's where you are today. So I love it. And so you did a 2+4, like you said, as well. So obviously medical school wasn't always in the plan per se. Did you ever at one point think like, I'm just going to be a pharmacist at the end of the day? Or did you always have this looming in the back of your head, like maybe I need to revisit this some more?
So I was very consistent on wanting to be a clinical pharmacist. I think that all the decisions I made in pharmacy school really just focused on clinical pharmacy and, pursuing a residency. And so I think my idea of going to medical school it was a really random kind of process when it came up. I think kind of thinking back on it, when I was a sophomore or in my second pre-professional year, I had a family member who was undergoing a transplant. And because it was during my winter break, I was basically the person that was there all the time. And I had met a doctor there. She was a fellow in the transplant team, and she had actually gone to pharmacy school prior to medical school. And the conversation was very brief. I didn't know anything of I wasn't in pharmacy school officially yet, so I couldn't really talk to her about it. But she had mentioned how she had gone to pharmacy school and then was a pharmacist, went to medical school, did residency, and now she's in her fellowship. So it kind of opened up, not necessarily the idea of medical school, but for me specifically, it kind of just gave me the idea that there are other paths that pharmacists could take, especially considering that, a lot of people really do, at least pharmacy students, really think the paths are, industry, community, or hospital, or in that case, but there's so many more options there. And so didn't really think about it at all after that until my P3 year. And that's kind of when the time I kind of decided on applying.
Wow, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
Because I think you're definitely right. There's so many like pharmacy students who get through this and think you have to follow this linear pathway from day one pharmaceutics to I have to be a community pharmacist at the end of the road, or clinical pharmacist. And obviously, as we know, there's a lot of opportunities out there. And so that's super cool. Did you ever circle back with that individual and let them know, like, hey, I actually end up doing or following in your footsteps? Or was it something that you kind of lost contact with over time?
We lost contact, definitely. I really wish I can go back kind of thinking about it. She kind of was that first seed to this whole idea, but I didn't get to see her after that.
Maybe we'll have her on the podcast someday. Who knows?
Yeah, that'd be cool.
So obviously you were thinking about pharmacy I guess like you were pretty confident in where you were going with things. So I take it that you didn't choose the Rutgers program based off of the dual degree opportunities. And when did this program come into existence? Was it something that came, I guess, it came from inception to where it is now while you were in pharmacy school? Or had it been around for a few years before you even started?
So the program itself was launched 2013. I believe they accepted their first class of students 2014, or maybe a few years after that. So it was already inception when I was already in school. It's not something that a lot of students talked about because you can only apply your P2, P3 year. So prior to that, the idea wasn't really there, the option. A lot of my peers didn't talk about it. So I had briefly seen it before, like if you just go on their website, they show all the dual degree options, but I didn't really consider that as an option for me until I got to my P3 year.
Right. You were still kind of sampling pharmacy a little bit and figuring out what you want to do with it. So that makes a lot of sense. And so let's talk a little bit more about the application logistics and kind of how you came into this program in the first place. So obviously the PharmD to MD dual degree program at Rutgers University is the first of its kind actually in the country, at least to my knowledge. So I've never seen anything like it before, and I think it's fascinating. So do you have any understanding, or I guess any background information that led to the inception of the program? What was the innovative urge that Rutgers sat down and thought to themselves, we should make this program. We need a PharmD to MD program. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I would say, as a medical student, that a lot of patient care is very interdisciplinary. And so, a lot of our schools at Rutgers, like the medical school, the nursing school, PA school, and the pharmacy school, are all under RBHS, which is the Rutgers Biomedical and Health Sciences. And that school itself, at least from me going through pharmacy school, is really big on creating events to make us meet each other and kind of initiate that interdisciplinary action before we graduate. And so I think the program kind of came up with that mindset in place. The fact that, a pharmacist who already has a really strong understanding of pharmacy, they can go into medical school and not only have a really strong foundation in both fields and, be a well-rounded clinician, they can also advocate for both specialties in both fields. And that was kind of a really big thing because I think the PharmD MD dual degree program was really looking to create, I guess the way they put it is to create leaders in different areas in healthcare, whether it's clinical or research or even industry. And so having the background of medicine and pharmacy, you can kind of do both specialties at the same time in terms of expressing knowledge in both fields. And I think that's kind of the main idea. And just generally, I would say just increasing the interdisciplinary of all the specialties together as well.
Absolutely. It's
Mhm.
blending like a perfect hybrid of
Yeah.
the two professions. They're like, pharmacists are great, so why don't we make physicians also, a little bit better? So obviously, you mentioned that you started the program, or most people can start considering the program in their, you said PY2/3 year, or so
Mhm.
when did you come across the program, and when did you start kind of moving forward with the steps necessary to get in?
Yeah, so you can apply you have two shots to apply. You can apply your P2 year or your P3 year. I didn't even think about applying my P2 year. That wasn't something I thought about. But in between your P2 year and P3 year at my school, we have an IPPE, which is like an introductory pharmacy practice experience, which is very similar to like an Appe in your fourth year. And so for me specifically, mine was in the hospital pharmacy. And so that's kind of where I interacted with a lot of medical students and like the medical team, because the pharmacy team let me go on rounds and do a lot of things that Appe students did. And so that's kind of when I ended up deciding that I really liked what medical students and the medical team does, more so on the fact that they took care of the patient more holistically. And I was really interested in that. Like I liked the pharmacy aspect, I liked the drugs, but I also really wanted to be involved in being more hands-on with patients. And I felt that like there's certain limitations in pharmacy that just isn't there in medicine. And so by the beginning of P3 year, I ended up deciding that, medical school is where I want to go. Originally, I was planning on taking the MCAT and going, the traditional path. I was thinking about doing a gap year or kind of figuring it out as I go, as I work as a pharmacist. And then I came across the PharmD program because I knew two classmates that got in during their P2 year. And so that kind of gave me the idea, like, let me look into it. And seeing that, the program was there, I liked what they were trying to emphasize, that like, you're not giving up pharmacy, you're kind of bolstering both specialties. And one of the biggest things is there's no MCAT required. So for me, it was like, I have to try, like if I don't get in, it's fine, but let me give this a shot. And so I applied my P3 year in January. There is two interview processes. I can kind of go into that in a little bit more detail.
For sure. Yeah. I was
Yeah,
going to follow up on that
yeah,
too.
yeah,
Well, go
yeah,
ahead. Yeah. Keep going.
yeah. So there are two interviews. So originally the actual application is, of course, no MCAT. So you have the 3 letters of recommendation that are required. And then you have a letter of interest, which is not necessarily similar to a personal statement. It's more so why this program and why going to medical school after pharmacy school.
Hmm.
And then you have like the general application with, your background, what you've done, to leadership experiences, volunteering and whatnot. And then you have the School of Pharmacy, PharmD committee look at your application. And if they think you're a potential candidate, they'll offer you an interview. And then I had that interview around, I would say, March. And then once that interview was over, if they think you're a qualified candidate, they'll essentially give all your application material as well as their like stamp of recommendation to the medical school.
Hmm.
And so Robert Wood Johnson Medical School, their general admissions committee will look at your application. If they think that the school's recommendation and your application kind of meets their standards, they'll give you their interview, which is what every medical student has, or any incoming medical student will take. It's an MMI interview. So I had like the multiple mini interview, and then at that point, it's just a yes or no from the school.
Wow.
So yeah.
So a lot of steps in there, a lot of things
Yes.
to unpack for sure. So I think it's so cool that you started with your little IPPE rotation and you had exposure to these medical students. You saw them. I think that's such an important feature. That's something that for myself, like I didn't go to a university that had a medical school at the
Mm-hmm.
time. I know Duquesne is starting an osteopathic program now, but at the time, so we didn't round with any of those medical students ever. I never really saw them. Maybe a couple other affiliated hospitals, but
Mm-hmm.
I didn't really have that initial exposure. So I think that's great that you saw that. And then you said you spoke with your couple friends who got in their P2 year.
Mm-hmm.
So that's so cool that you're already in as a second year pharmacy student. So you kind of, not to say coast, but you're
Yeah.
on a different trajectory for sure. So I
Mm-hmm.
think that's very interesting. So for yourself, you said that you applied and then obviously you go to this committee through your medical school. Is that correct? Or not through your medical school, but through your pharmacy program. And who's on that committee exactly? Is it just like your dean and a bunch of like other interprofessional
Yeah.
like
So
individuals?
So I believe like our main dean is on it, Dean Barone. He was kind of one of the spearheads for the program. He's on it, and then there are a bunch of general faculty that are on it. I believe some of the faculty do also teach at the medical school. I could be wrong, but so it's a pretty extensive list of faculty that look at your application. The ones that interview aren't all of them. It's, like of 5, 6 of them, if anything. Yeah.
Absolutely. And so I definitely want to unpack more of what you said, but I'm also curious to know like how competitive is this process? Like how many applicants are they even looking for to recommend from this particular committee? Is it 10? Is it less than that?
So unfortunately, the one thing about the program is they don't give out numbers in terms of like how many students apply, how many they accept. I do know it is a very competitive program just by speaking to my classmates, because I knew a lot of classmates that, did apply, unfortunately, didn't get one of the steps of the process. For my year specifically, there's 6 of us in my M1 year that got in through the PharmD program.
Wow.
And out of those 6, 2 of them got in their P2 year, like I mentioned, and then 4 of them, including myself, got in during our P3 year. I do know that the program does emphasize a lot of P3s more than P2s, just because P3s have more, more experiences and understanding of pharmacy to kind of make the decision to kind of change their trajectory a little bit, like you mentioned. So yeah, I would say relatively competitive, less than 10 definitely every year.
Wow. So that's crazy. So then you also mentioned, I don't want to overstep on this either, but you said no MCAT. That's a life-changing experience, because I've got beef with the MCAT for sure.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was saying I'm definitely really lucky on that main fact that I don't have to take the MCAT. I feel like a lot of my classmates right now, when they hear that, it's a complete different experience. So
Exactly. So that's super awesome that you were able to avoid that step for traditional applicants. But let's say that you hadn't gotten into this particular program, you still could have applied as just a traditional applicant yourself. Okay, so this was just one of those like opportunities that you saw along the way that your pharmacy school offered you, and you kind of said, why not just try this out and see what happens? And obviously it worked out pretty nicely. So do you also have to do AMCAS? You said that once you got like the referral from the committee to the medical school, they said, we're going to send you through this MMI interview. So you don't have to even do the AMCAS application or anything else like that?
So, because I got in my P3 year, my entire P4 year was just me doing my Appes. But around the like January, February of my P4 year, we did get communications like with the medical school just for us to make an AMCAS account and apply. Like they made it in a way that the only school that I can choose is Bravo Wood Johnson Medical School. But just for AMCAS to have our information, we did have to put in like apply through there. But it was, nothing for us to pay. Everything was kind of just standard procedure just for them to officially have our names down in their roster of like students that are going to be incoming that year.
Wow. And so when did you have the interview itself for the medical school? When did you have the MMI? Because did that occur before other applicants were offered interviews at that point?
So I believe it's generally standard of when the medical school offers interviews to the pharmacy students. So like I mentioned, our pharmacy portion of the interview was around March. And so they did tell me that the days that they will give for the interview are going to be very brief. So when the medical school did contact me, they gave me 2 days in March and 1 day in May for the interview. And, originally I was going to take the March interview day, and it's acceptances are on a rolling basis, but I had a lot going on at the time, so I pushed it to May. And so I had my interview in May. I'm not exactly sure if that's what a lot of traditional students have. I'm not exactly sure on the timeline for them.
For sure.
But
so that's pretty early, actually. So that's what I was curious about was, did they reserve these spots and they only allow, like, it's almost like an early assurance program, which you might have heard of just in passing. But so it sounds like they offer these positions ahead of time, because I was thinking to myself, well, what if they didn't allow you to get to, let's say they said no to you, then they would still, I hope, give you the opportunity to then apply as traditional, and that's done a whole year in advance. So that sounds like what they did for you, which is great, actually. So you kind of had 2 options there. Awesome. So obviously you applied and got in. So how did they adjust your Appe rotations based on that?
So they actually, for me specifically, they didn't really need to. I don't think any of my co-students right now as M1s through the program had anything to be adjusted really, just because for me specifically, I had a specific program in my Appies that was kind of like a mini residency for me. So like I had a lot of my main Appies out of the way right off the beginning. And I also already scheduled my Appies in a way that I would end early. So, and I think a lot of my other co-students did that as well. So there really wasn't a lot that they did, but they did emphasize if this is something that you were interested in, just because our Appy rotations are scheduled really early before the whole interview process. They did emphasize for us to try getting more clinical Appies aside from other types of Appies. And so I know a lot of students did try to aim for that, just so they have more experiences in a, like a team with other healthcare workers and medical students in the medical team as well.
Right. Because you still obviously have to finish the pharmacy graduation requirements, which makes sense. But yeah, I was wondering if they like kind of tailored it, like you said, more towards like a medical school style clerkship where you're up and rounding at 4 a.m. and stuff. But no, fortunately not yet. Awesome. So, and then additionally, just to cover a few more logistical things, like, are there any additional qualifications or like selection criteria that the program considers? Like, is there a particular GPA like threshold they look for, or anything that you can think of? Like, obviously, research experience is good, things like that.
Yeah, so they did have, there is a GPA requirement. They do look at students that are, they look at their transcript. I believe the GPA requirement is a 3.5. And then based off of that, they kind of look at everything that you've done. Like I mentioned in the application, they essentially expect you to have service experience, some type of research experience, leadership, especially like in pharmacy school. And so a lot of them they're not necessarily requirements, but it's expected that, you do have these experiences to help bolster your application. And so aside from the GPA and other than that, those are generally the main requirements.
Right. So just get the grades, and then it's more of a holistic review, which is pretty standard with most medical school admissions processes. Awesome. So it sounds like you had obviously a very great experience that came from that. So I guess this is more like a personal question, but like, what was it like seeing some of your like pharmacy classmates like graduate, yet you're still on this, relatively long journey? Like, what kind of thoughts have been going through your head thinking about that?
I would say it really hit me when they were applying for their like fellowships or for residency, because like a year before that, that's what I would have done. And so like me not doing that, it was kind of I would say a little bit surreal, a little bit scary, I would say, definitely, just because I felt like these entire almost 6 years I was so like focused on going into clinical pharmacy, and then almost at the end I just kind of changed the path as to what I was doing. So I would say I was a little bit scared on that end. And then, once we graduated, I graduated May. We started medical school in July. So, and in July, a lot of my friends started working as well. So, me studying in school and everything and them like working, it's a very different environment. And so I think it's a little bit bittersweet just because, I have amazing friends in medical school now, luckily, but it's not like my old friends in pharmacy school aren't there as well. So it's just a different environment. So a lot of us are still trying to adjust in whatever area that we ended up falling under. But I think it's a little bit difficult in terms of planning and stuff, but I'm grateful where I am. So I'm kind of happy.
Absolutely. Yeah. It feels like a little sacrilegious to, like you said, be on this pathway to become a clinical pharmacist. And then, I went to mid-year clinical meeting and with all the residency showcases and everything. And I was already in medical school at that point. So I had my feet up the whole time. Everyone else was like running around frustrated and, nervous and stuff. But it was definitely a weird experience because like, what am I doing here? But I'd already bought the tickets. So
yeah.
Awesome. So let's talk a little bit then about like the medical school experience. Everyone loves to ask about this particular, like how was the transition and so on. So, obviously you're still pretty fresh in the medical school process, but what has medical school been like for you thus far?
I would say, I think my school has done a very good job in transitioning us into medical school. I actually was kind of scared. Like I knew pharmacy school was rigorous, but I feel like medical school is still a different level of rigorous in terms of the amount of volume of material. And so they've done a really good job in starting out a little bit slow. So we did like biostats, which for me, as a pharmacist, biostats like the back of your hand. And so that stuff was relatively easy. We just started anatomy and cell biology. And I think
Good
now
luck.
it's yeah, exactly. I think now it's kind of hitting me where like these are the areas that I'm a little weaker because I've never really experienced it. Like the last time I took cell biology in any regard was freshman year, 6 years ago, Gen Bio. And so a lot of this is very new. So I think I have like the school is really good in terms of supporting, but I definitely do. It's a little bit of a journey right now because it's a lot of transitioning in terms of figuring out what to do and how to study. So I feel like I'm starting school completely all over again, which I haven't done since freshman year. So it's an interesting process right now.
It's definitely a little surreal. I
Yeah.
agree with you entirely because that's where we enter medical school feeling like top of our game, clinical,
Mm-hmm.
like experience wise. Like we know how everything runs in the hospital and what meds you can get in order and so on. And then you go back to the classroom, that like literally the week after that, and you're like, oh my goodness, I don't know anything about gross anatomy. Like we're in the anatomy labs. It's like I don't know what this muscle is and what innervates it. So it's definitely quite a transition, but it sounds like you've had obviously a very good experience thus far. I'm sure it'll pick up in a little bit, but you're going to be obviously, I think, more prepared than obviously some of your counterparts, just because you have this graduate level kind of
Mm-hmm.
foundation that you're building off of. Maybe not so much for anatomy, but
Yeah.
like one of my anatomy partners or someone in my class is like a anatomy PhD, so like of course they did well in that. But all right. So, do you have any like particular courses that you found really fulfilling thus far, or I know you're still getting started too, but
Yeah, I would say right now the course we're in is our cells to structures, so it's really just cell biology, histology, anatomy.
oof.
So yeah, so it's definitely not something I'm used to or have any experience with, but it definitely kind of gave me a really good perspective on medical school because I feel like a lot of people, when they hear a pharmacist going into medical school, they're like, oh my God, you know everything, like you'll be fine. And I'm here not knowing anything right now, you know? And I
Mhm.
definitely do see myself at an advantage when we get to pharmacology and certain medications. But it does make me realize that even if I know it, there's still so much I need to learn, you know?
Mhm.
And I think right now, because I'm at a place where I'm in material that I haven't really seen before, it's giving me a good understanding that, I can't be too confident. I can't, I have to make everything a learning experience. And I think it's been helping me right now.
That's a great perspective, and
Yeah.
obviously you have to stay humble throughout the process. And don't
Hmm.
worry, anatomy is very humbling. And I'm curious to know, is your program operating under this new model that medical schools are kind of transitioning to, where they're doing an 18-month didactic period? Is that something that you guys are working under, or is your model still 2 years of didactic work and then you do clinical rotation?
I believe ours is still 2 years of
Mhm.
didactic work, but our curriculum is actually, our faculty is really good in changing curriculum based on like feedback.
Mhm.
So a lot of things have been changing year to year. So it could be different. I am actually not sure how it's going to be next year.
Right, right. At your stage, I remember just like I just need to focus on the next test and that's it. I don't want to worry about anything else.
Exactly.
And so you kind of mentioned the workload a little bit right now. How just for like our listeners to better understand it, how does like the workload compare to like just a pharmacy education, or maybe like how is the material presented to you that might be a little different than how pharmacy was?
I would say there are definitely a lot of similarities that I feel like other like students that went through an undergrad that came here might not understand. Like in pharmacy school, you have a lot of faculties changing around per lecture, and that's something that medical school does have in certain aspects. But another thing is for us, we have like 3, 4, 5 hour, 3, 4 like 1 hour lectures a day. Whereas in pharmacy school, it's like you have certain different classes where you have them like once or twice a week, and they might be 2, 3 hours long, but it's just one lecture, you know?
Hmm.
So it does seem like there's so much more material in medical school just because the amount of content they're giving you in a week is a lot more than in pharmacy school. I would say I think because of that, like I thought I had a relatively decent understanding in terms of like how I study in pharmacy school, but that approach I realized just does not work in medical school. And so it really is something that, when they say you're drinking out of a fire hose, I understand it now.
Yeah, you don't really quite know what it's like until
Yeah,
you're on the other end of that, and then
exactly.
it's like wow. But yeah, you kind of have to adapt your study strategies like anything else. But you obviously get accustomed to it, and the best thing is like what works for one person might not work for the other person, and some things might work way better for you than others and stuff. So like I realized, I think a little too late, that like Anki or third-party resources like flashcards and stuff really help with like route memorization, especially when it comes to board exams.
Mm-hmm.
But obviously for in-house exams, then you kind of have to just study the PowerPoint slides and learn as much as you can. So I think that was a really good contrast though, because like for pharmacy school, I had like 5 different classes that were like, we had
Mm-hmm.
respiratory, we had neuro, we had all these other things that were kind of subdivided at the same time, versus medical schools in blocks. At least that's how it was for me.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe yours is a similar way. And so I guess this is kind of getting into like more of the, you kind of alluded to this already, but in like the long run, like how do you envision like your like dual trained healthcare professionals will make a difference in like the healthcare industry?
I would in the healthcare industry.
Not necessarily industry, like I guess
Yeah.
just like in healthcare as a whole.
Yeah. I definitely think that, coming from a pharmacy background, it really does give you a unique perspective, not only on like pharmacy in general, but just working in a team-based setting. I feel like, a lot of physicians, more so the older physicians than the newer physicians, they do have a certain mindset as though like, they're in charge and what their decision is their final decision. And I feel like as a pharmacist, you do understand how a team works and everyone's approach and how everyone within the healthcare team kind of plays together. And I think that's something that I've noticed medical students don't really understand in their 3rd or 4th year. I've seen a lot of medical students not understand, if you don't understand something about medications, like the pharmacist is there. Like instead of not knowing the answer, you have other people that you can ask that aren't just your attendings or your residents.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like coming from a pharmacy background, I've seen that from my perspective. And so I think I'll have a larger idea of who I can go to or how a team can work in terms of that manner. And I think in general, because of pharmacy is really big on advocating for pharmacy, I'm really interested in being able to just advocate for like different specialties in general. And I think that's really good for a patient perspective, just because having like a really good pharmacy background and then building it up in a clinical manner, I'm able to kind of pull in different areas that I feel like certain people in medical school might not see, like just a little things here and there that could really impact a patient's care. And I think that's kind of be really beneficial in the future.
Exactly. Like having that experience of
Mm-hmm.
working as kind of like a mid-level, healthcare practitioner, like you kind of understand where your role is, and then how other people's roles, like you're not just one perfect entity that knows everything.
Mm-hmm.
You have to kind of collaborate well with other people. And obviously it's all about, at the end of the day, the goal is to obviously provide that excellent patient care. So it sounds like having both, I guess, degrees helps with the awareness of kind of staying focused on that task at hand.
Yes.
So awesome. So I love that. And so also kind of circling back to medical school, you kind of like mentioned this as well, but I was just curious, like, is there anything that you found more challenging in medical school than you were originally expecting?
I would say in general, I think just studying in general, I found very difficult. More so because I feel like in pharmacy school, a lot of the studying that we had to do, at least in my pharmacy school, was not necessarily just rote memorizing. It was kind of finding the connections and figuring out how that worked. A lot of my school was really big on kind of us not memorizing, us figuring it out ourselves. And so that's kind of how I approached a lot of my studying. But right now, with the classes I'm taking, a lot of it is just hardcore memorizing. And it is important to understand, like how the body works and everything. But in order for you to know that, you need to know every single part of the body and like other areas like histology. You need to be able to see so many pictures or like of slides to actually recognize what is what. And that's something that me personally, I'm not used to. So I think that just having myself sit down and be able to process that in a proper way that's actually like time efficient and efficient in terms of studying is something that I'm realizing that I'm having more difficulty. And I realized that I didn't have that difficulty in pharmacy school. So I'm just trying to figure that out right now. So it's interesting.
Exactly. And like, especially in anatomy or maybe in histology, like
Mm-hmm.
not all of those principles like will kind of intertwine. Like you think of a drug and like the interactions, there's some kind of like connections or webs that you can kind of tie to different things, or like you can realize like, oh, this is a diuretic, it's in this class of medication. So there's more like webs and interplay between those. But obviously if it's anatomy, you're like, oh my goodness, this nerve goes here, but it doesn't make any sense. It's labeled something different. And So I understand your frustration. I guess like a follow up to that then, alternatively, is there anything about medical school that you've found more enjoyable than you were initially like presuming?
I would say not necessarily that I was initially presuming. I knew I had a really large interest in like the body and other aspects from like pharmacy school, because in pharmacy school you learn about disease states and diagnosis and things like that, but more so for us to learn about the drugs. It's just kind of like a beginning stepping stone to that. And I knew that I had a really large interest in it. And so kind of for me right now, I'm learning about, I didn't think I would like cell biology as much as I did, just because it's like a lot of details in within a lot of topics. I actually, as much as I'm struggling with anatomy, I really enjoy anatomy.
Hmm.
And it's like these are topics that we never really had in pharmacy school. They have a very small aspect that they teach you, like this part, this is how the heart works, but like you don't really see the heart, you know?
Hmm.
And for me to actually see it physically and, you know, look around in different parts of the body, I find very, very fascinating. And I think that it's something, you know, it makes me realize that I made a really good choice in terms of my career. Like I'm happy to be here.
I love it. I love it. And so, like as a pioneer, I guess in this like dual degree program, you're not necessarily the first, but obviously you're out here and you're doing it, and you're one of the, I guess, because you said 2013 was like the first couple of years, so
Hmm.
there's a very small subset of you individuals who've gone through this degree pathway. So, what advice do you have for like aspiring students who may be interested in pursuing like a similar path as you?
Yeah, I would say I wouldn't go into pharmacy school with the mindset of wanting to go to medical school. I think there are other like routes that you can take to get there. But I definitely think that, you know, don't limit yourself if you are in pharmacy school. You know, I feel like a lot of students do come up with the option that if they go to medical school or go to another graduate school, people might look down in terms of them kind of forgetting pharmacy school or giving up that aspect. But there's so many paths that you can take as a pharmacist, and I think that medical school is honestly a really good option, just as someone in medical school. And so I would say definitely, if this is an option that you're looking for, work hard, see other people that are also interested in the program, people that have gone through it, and see, you know, what their experiences are, and just give it a shot. I feel like it's better to try. At least that's how I kind of went into it. Better to try than regret not trying later on.
Absolutely. I have so many like pharmacists that are reaching out to me who say, I wish I could did this years and
Hmm.
years ago, but I have a mortgage and I have kids and I don't have the time or the resources necessarily to make it happen. So I think that's such great advice. Like if you are thinking about it, why not just shoot your shot
Hmm.
and see what happens? And you know, if it's not meant for you, then guess what? At the end of the day, you're still going to be a
Yeah.
pharmacist and do very well. Alrighty. Well, we're getting close to the end of the interview, and I'd like to wrap up with a few like lifestyle based
Hmm.
questions. And so obviously like obtaining your pharmacy doctorate is no easy task, and then immediately starting medical school after that can be extremely overwhelming. So what have you done or are currently doing right now to minimize personal burnout?
So I would say that was kind of my a bigger concern, the burnout, because just because I kind of transitioned relatively fast into medical school, I've been giving myself time to do things that aren't school related. You know, like I've been really good in terms of making time to go out and hang out with friends, or, you know, go on a walk, or anything that doesn't involve school, I think is really important to give yourself time to do. You know, I feel like a lot of students think that I have to study 24/7. And at the end of the day, that's not going to help you. That's going to make you more, that's going to impact your health and well being more than do better for your grades.
Hmm.
And so, for me, because I have personally experienced burnout before, I'm really sensitive to making sure I don't have that experience again.
Hmm.
And so I do a lot of things that, you know, are physically, mentally calming and not school related.
Exactly. You got to
Hmm.
compartmentalize
Hmm.
all the school, like tuck it away, do your 8 hours each day, and then tuck it away and don't pick it up. Don't think
Hmm.
about it. It'll be there tomorrow. Don't worry. So I think that's great advice. And so you also like mentioned kind of before we even got this interview started
Hmm.
that you are looking to get licensed as a pharmacist. So you're not currently licensed yet because you kind of had a
Hmm.
fast turnaround time with everything. So what are your goals for that, and what's kind of the timeline for you?
Yeah, so I did end up just taking my NAPLEX. I do have my MPGJE to take, but I know that like school is definitely going to pick up very fast. So I am trying to figure out when I can fit that in. So that might not be something I do anytime soon.
Hmm.
But ideally, I do want to be licensed so I can work. Personally, just even working per diem, I think it's not as much of it's not as big of a commitment. And I feel like the income that I can have along with school kind of helps me personally. So ideally, I would want to, by next year, I be licensed and start working on the side of school as well.
I think that's such a good goal too, because a lot of people will ask me that question, like, how do you manage working in medical school? And I mean, I answer them with the same, I guess, question, I suppose. It's like, how did you work as a pharmacy intern in pharmacy school? Well, they're like, you make time for it. You kind of get adjusted. And I think you have a good game plan, because the first semester should just be focused on med school. Second semester, you kind of getting into research opportunities and setting yourself up for the summer. And then that's the summer is basically when you kind of start like working as a pharmacist, getting all those, kind of building up that income for, because third year you won't have time to, so make sure you get your trips in then. So awesome. I love it. And I know it's still obviously very early, but do you have any particular like medical specialty you're interested in pursuing at the time being?
I am definitely keeping my eyes open because I don't know all the specialties out there. In pharmacy school, I was very interested in critical care. That was kind of something that I thought I would pursue as like a PGY2 in pharmacy school. So I still have that interest. So right now I really am thinking about, anesthesia or even like internal med going into pulm crit care. But like I said, I have a lot of areas that I still need to explore. So while that is one of the interests I have right now, I'm keeping my mind and my eyes open to other areas that I might like.
Exactly. And I think it's funny because in pharmacy school, you only kind of see where you only work where there's other clinical pharmacists necessarily. So you might not have even seen an operating room before. You might not have seen what anesthesia does and things like that, or pathology labs.
Yeah.
So, I think it's important to keep an open book and not just like settle for, I don't know, internal medicine or something like that that you've only kind of worked with before. So I think you have a good mindset with that regard. And so this is kind of a follow-up to that question. You can take this wherever you'd like, but what are your personal, professional, or business-oriented goals that you'd like to accomplish in the next 5 to 10 years?
I would say in 5 to 10 years, I definitely see myself working in residency. Ideally, I would want to have, I'm only 24, so like I never really had like other goals in terms of like financial aspects because I have just been in school this entire time. But I do definitely want to, potentially have my own place to live. Right now, I commute from home. So like have my own place to live, whether it's an apartment or anything like that. And just in general, just start enjoying life. I feel like at that point, my main focus will be working and just, living life.
Yeah, hopefully not school.
Yeah, not
or
school.
You're going back
Hopefully
for your
not.
JD or something.
Imagine, that'd be crazy. But yeah, so like just working, hopefully finding a specialty I really like. And I think that's kind of my main goal, kind of focusing on, I'm interested in research too. So ideally kind of focusing research within that specialty of choice.
Awesome. Well, it sounds like you got a lot of good things coming down the road. So I'm excited to see where life takes you. But alrighty, so we've come to the end of our interview today, and I'd like to thank all of our listeners for the support. If you have any additional questions about the medical school journey, check out my website at www.physicianpharmacist.com. As a reminder, we are actively looking for additional podcast guests to interview on the show. If you believe you have a unique story that could be beneficial to the listeners or know someone who would be a quality candidate, please reach out to me personally on LinkedIn or leave a message on my personal website. Before we let you go, how can our listeners get in touch with you or learn more about you?
I would say you can email me if you would like. My email is pnparikh, Parikh 05@gmail.com. Or you can contact me on LinkedIn. My name is Prachi Parikh, so you can probably find me.
Fantastic. And all that will be linked down in the show notes as well. So thank you so much again for being on the show, Dr. Parikh. And I recognize you're an extremely busy individual. I obviously know what you're going through. So keep your head up. And I really do appreciate your time today.
Yeah, thank you for having the interview. I think this is a great opportunity.
All right. Fantastic. Well, take care.